Welcome to Being Matthew 25, a live stream series from the Presbyterian Mission Agency. I'm your host, Diette Decker, Acting Senior Director of Communications for the Presbyterian Mission Agency, and I am thrilled that you have joined us today. All of us know that change is a reality of life, and if you are a church leader, then leading change in the church is something you will be uniquely familiar with. Change really means transition, a move from one state to another. And in that sense, there is always change occurring around us or even within us. Recently, I sat down with the stated clerk of the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A., Reverend Dr. J. Herbert Nelson II, and Reverend Dr. Diane Moffett, the Executive Director and President of the Presbyterian Mission Agency, to hear their thoughts on what it means to be a 21st century church and what change this might have on local communities and congregations. Let's watch this conversation together.
And J. Herbert, it is great to have you on Being Matthew 25. We have the great gift of hindsight. And Diane, you and I have talked about that liminal space, that in-between space that the Israelites in the wilderness were living in, between slavery in Egypt and coming to the promised land, that the disciples lived between Friday and Sunday's resurrection. We have the gift of knowing that God is steadfast in God's love for us. And there is hope and peace and a promise on the other side. And I think in this liminal space, as we're just starting to see a little bit of that, hope of returning to normal, whatever that is or may be, what are your hopes for the future of the church? And having named the grief and the lament that we've gone through, this time of reflection and paying attention to how the Spirit is moving in this time, and then now we're coming up to the hope. So what do you hope for the future of our church?
My hope is that we will take seriously that, quite frankly, we will not be the church that we used to be. And that this pandemic has not just changed the way we order our life from day to day, but it is a time where we have to begin to extract this sanctified spirit to be able to move beyond where we are right now. And that is really going to the rudiments of faith, of recognizing that we don't know the way because we never have known the way. And the same way we had to give up ourselves during this period in order to learn to live into and to love and to love vicariously sometimes, that this is going to be the way forward. And it always has been. And I think the challenges are coming to a realization that there's not going to be the normal that we've been expecting and we've been experiencing, but instead there's going to be not even a new normal. There's going to be a reality that we have to face, and they're going to be continually with ups and downs, just as they have been before. And this pandemic has just, I think, presented a much larger connection to the fact that we have to be more versatile, we have to be more spiritually equipped, and we have to begin to take that thing called the institutional church. We have to take that in a sense of our coming together, but on many ways, it's going to be the spirituality of that church that's going to help us to get to where we need to be. And we have to practice a lot more spirituality, prayer, and dealing with issues of long suffering. And what does that mean, praying through. And I think this pandemic has brought us to our knees, where we've had to really begin to adjust who we are and recognize whose we are in the Spirit.
I love that, recognizing whose we are. Amen. What about you, Diane? What about your hopes?
Well, of course, I concur with what has been said. But I think, too, the only constant is change now. So adaptable leadership. This is not a shift in terms of being able to simply manage something. We're going to have to use our sanctified imagination, our prophetic imagination, to really lean into some pieces. And I think we're going to have to embody this idea of once reformed, always reforming. We say it, but we need to institutionalize it. We need to lift it up. We need to talk about what does it mean to be innovative? What does it mean to be creative? Knowing that God by definition is creator, and that there's just going to be this constant change. I think that's where we are in the world, and that's where the world is going. So I think the adaptability that the clerk talks about, I think the flexibility, and most importantly, I want to underscore the concept of being spiritually grounded, like centered, like knowing that you know, as my granddad used to say, that you know that you know. I'm hoping that our churches get on this roller coaster in terms of allowing God to take us to the places and spaces we need to be. To start ministries, to stop them. There's times they don't go, sometimes we'll do something just because we've done it all the time. And there are things that we need to keep. They're basic and they're fundamental. But there are other places where we really need to look for creative expressions, what God is doing. So I think we're going to be in flux, and I want us to be open to that. Because as you say, that is a reality that we live by. Tomorrow is not promised, and it doesn't mean that I'm going to be the same person. But we have kind of lived with that thing. But this pandemic has pressed upon us the understanding that nothing is really promised to you. And we've got to really begin to see that and to really walk by faith.
I hear you talking about social justice and state clerk. I know that you are very much believe that that is an act of faith, to be present and advocating for those who are at the margins. That is part of our call as disciples of Christ. What do you say to folks who would say, yes, but that's a little too much. Now we're getting into politics. Now you're asking me to come out of my comfort zone. Can you respond to that?
Well, let me first thank you for helping with that. The word comfort zone is not even real in our societal concept. And it's not even connected deeply to our own faith. I read Jesus from the beginning of his ministry. He was a person that went into a temple. And we don't know the total words that he shared with those individuals. What we do know is that the inauguration of his ministry in some ways was capsulized by some words that angered people in that temple. And as a result, they had to put him to death in that moment. So forget about crucifixion and all of these other things that happened later. They were going to kill him at the beginning of his first sermon. I could not imagine having gone into the pulpit the first time that I preached my first sermon and given the words that somebody would have been running me out of town and asking me to actually jump off of a cliff. That's what it ended up being. I think what this period has called us to, if we are really thinking, is to a really radical transformation of the church, a calling to be daring in challenging powers and principalities to be what they have to be for the sake of building people and the lives of people in communities. And I've seen everything that everyone else has seen, and that's been children in cages at the border, seeing now what is happening in the Ukraine. We are seeing over and over and over again an African American woman, the first that will join the Supreme Court of the United States of America, just beaten down all during the substance of a hearing to really give her the right to be on the Supreme Court, much of which had to do with nothing. We have a lot of pieces of evil in this world right now that we're having to deal with. And the church is confronted with that. We are supposed to be the holy place in the community. We are supposed to be the place that gives communion to remember Jesus. We are the place that buries people. We are the place that lifts up those who have been lost. But there is something in us in this period that draws us so close to what we think should be normalcy. And again, getting back to this pandemic, what it taught us is that the normalcy that we think we have is really not there. We live from day to day. I can be here right now talking to you, and in 5 minutes, I'm gone. And because my life is not mine. So the question I think we have to raise when we're talking about the issues of how we read our scriptures, how we understand the faith, that the institution that we serve is not simply here to be preserved. The institution is to actually be willing, as Jesus has taught, to lose their life in order that others might gain a life. And I think that's the challenge of the church. What are we willing to give up? What are we willing to lose? What are we willing, even if the doors sometimes have to be closed? Because we've given away everything we have, and we have nothing else to give. There's something about the servant leadership and the expectation of an institution like the Church of Jesus Christ that calls us to something much deeper, even at the risk of losing our own life, even at the risk of losing our temple, even at the risk of losing our power and our standing in a community and our wealthy congregation that we brag about how much money we have in this denomination. I think we have to begin to risk our lives for the sake of the gospel, and we're nowhere near that right now, to be honest with you, in Christendom, not just in the Presbyterian, but throughout Christendom.
How do we get there? How do you get folks to the point where they're willing to risk their life for that? You know, we have people signing up to go into the military. That part of that is to risk their life. But we in the church are seeing numbers of, engaged in membership dwindling across the U.S., across denominations. And you say this is, we need to get Christendom to a place where people are willing to lose their lives. How do we get there?
The Bible reminds us always that we have to engage in prayer and supplication. It's not easy. I think sometimes what will happen at the end of my own life with my daughter, who I love dearly, and a lot of my preparation and the preparation of my wife, we were all about trying to prepare for her life right now, and we're giving a lot of things to make that happen. And we've done a lot of things to make that happen. But there's something in that love ethic that drives us to do that, and I think we as a church have to learn how to love again, not have big barns and all of these kinds of things, or the building of great temples. But how do we learn to love those who are in our midst, however they may come? And how are we willing to give of ourselves and of the church, even at the risk of losing the church? I think that's the challenge, and that's the kind of love that's required in order to make it.
And that to me means that you've got to be with God. That's not something that we can do. It's a part of the inner transformation that happens when the human encounters the holy and does, divinity. When we have that transfer, that love for God, that love for Jesus, that love that says, I will invest this. I will give all of this because I see something, I know someone, I have seen in my own imagination, what life really is all about. That is so deeply spiritual. You cannot fake that. And you talk about that love ethic. It's a relationship. It's the relationship that you have with God, just as you have with your daughter, and I have with my children. You can see glimpses of it in that, and it's even much deeper, much more profound. We have got to really, really embrace the spiritual disciplines as a way of life. It cannot be left up into the head. Right. It has to be an encounter and an experience that moves people to really take up the cross. Jesus is very clear. This new narrative, I'm saying we need a new narrative, but not really. I'm saying, what does faithfulness require of us in terms of discipleship? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Jesus was not executed on a Roman cross because he merely prayed. His prayers led him down a path to encounter and engage the principalities and powers that would take away the hope of God's people. It was out of that, for the joy of that somebody would get it, that he said, I'm going to give it all. For the possibility that, someone will get it, whether it's our own children or someone, you give it. And so we are at a time, again, where we've got to critically reflect. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? Jesus never shied away from controversy. He never shied away. He stood his ground, right? Yeah, he stood his ground. In the midst of that, he never said, oh, this is too much. This is going to be... No, this is the word of God, and y'all want to do something else, but, I'm seeing you devour your widows' houses. I'm seeing how your laws are exploiting people. No, he called it out, and he called it out in such a way as not to say, to condemn, but that the world could wake up to a new possibility to where God's perspective and God's principle, where God is coming from, God's kingdom or God's kingdom. So I think, that's going to be very important. We can't, for lack of a better term, and I'm not suggesting that everyone is doing this, even on a conscious level, but you can't play church. It's got to be more than a role. And I think that's challenging for all of us. What does that mean to do that? And it requires that encounter daily.
We've been talking a lot about the institutional church, bringing the church into the 21st century to be innovative and creative. Can you talk a little bit about how OGA and PMA are collaborating to bring that to fruition for the church?
Well, I think we're collaborating in many ways because we have to, and I don't think that's the only reason. But we are right now in a major piece of reinventing the national headquarters, how we work together. We have commissions that are going to be coming to the floor that have a lot of ideas of what the future of the church ought to look like. And we are engaging those pieces together. I think the other part of it is the continual conversations around what does this mean ultimately for both of our leaderships when it comes down to what the church is going to look like when this is over. The conversations that we have that are probably offline about what and where we are right now and how we work together even now in these times when things are quite uncertain for us. This is going to be a huge General Assembly in many ways. I want to go back just for a second and share that, the iterations that we are facing right now have been historic. I probably hold the position, and I've said it publicly, and I'll say it again, that when we reunited back in early 1980s, I believe it was, 83, we came together because both the Southern and the Northern Church were losing members. And a major part of this was, in fact, to come together and be the largest Protestant denomination in the United States of America. We actually achieved that. The reality was, and that as soon as we got into the building in Louisville, Kentucky here, the question over who was going to run the denomination immediately came to the top. And that hindered in a lot of ways the ongoing movement of the life of this denomination. We got stuck in a lot of committee work, a lot of other things that have been going on that did not necessarily bear good fruit. And of course, the LGBT struggles and all of who's in, who's out, and these kinds of things took a lot of time. The taking of money from per capita and boycotting the denomination. And so when you put all of these things together, there has really never been a space in this denomination where the repair work of that was ongoing. And so we have, in a sense, come into a period of time where the work of repair in this denomination has to happen now. And we have to figure this one out. I don't know that what is coming to the General Assembly is going to necessarily resolve everything, nor what dent it will make. But I'm clear that we have to be singularly focused on what does it mean to open our spirits and our minds to new possibilities going forward that will unify this denomination, despite the fact that there are always going to be people in a denomination, just as there are in people's families, that are not going to agree with one another. Mm-hmm. We should not be walking out of the door because we disagree with somebody else. We should not reject people because they are different. We should not be in this piece of judging people. We are not judges. God is judge. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge that we have, is how do we get over this mentality for so many years of believing that an overture that comes to the General Assembly, and I know I'm going to be challenged on this outside of this this time of sharing, but that the overture of a General Assembly makes it right for everybody. It makes it right for the church's stance, but it does not call us to be any less loving of people who may not necessarily believe in that same stance. And it's not a time to walk away and quit the church. It's time to come back and equip the church to understand even more. Mm. How many times did LGBT persons have to come to the door and knock over and over again? People didn't quit. They stayed in that fight, and they stayed in that struggle until the church came to be able to see through a different level of eyes. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the intestinal fortitude about the gospel. Jesus never stopped. Mm-hmm. Jesus kept making people mad, kept saying things that they did not want to hear, kept angering the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and take off those robes and do what you need to do for faith, for the sake of faith in God. And we have to learn how to do that without throwing the towel down, walking out the door, slamming the door on folks, calling folks names, and then saying, I'm out of here. I mean, this is not Christian. It is not a part of what our faith is about. It's about perseverance and standing in the struggle and recognizing that the choice is not made on the floor of a General Assembly. It's actually made by a God who gives us life every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that in terms of working together, that we are servant leaders. And the purpose of the service that we render with our different offices, it's like we're one body, though. The foot can't say to the hand, we're one body and we're seeking to go forward. And so it's like, yeah, it makes sense for us to work together. I can just say from my perspective, with the support of the state at Clerk, we have been plowing that ground to really work more closely together on particular pieces as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's fundamental, because that's not about me. It's not about my office or PMA or OJA. It is about the witness of the church to my grandbabies. Mm-hmm. It is about, will the church be strengthened? We have a leadership challenge here. And I think in order to meet it, we have to really, really look at it holistically.
I would also add to that, and thank you for sharing. A part of the working together is a recognition that this is our calling. It's not new. It's not something that's grand. It's a part of our calling. And the expectation is that whatever indifference we have to figure out what is the greatest opportunity to serve the gospel. And I think that's a part of the ongoing challenge across where we've been historically and otherwise, is how do we find that place that centers us to be able to find the common ground that we can work together. And to recognize that it's for the whole church. It's not just for a particular agency, as Diane says. It has to be about the business of building the kingdom of God. And that's much bigger than the church. Mm-hmm. And I think we forget that sometimes. And it's much bigger than our tithes and offerings, because what God has given us, we could never, ever do for ourselves. And that's certainly bigger than a tithe or an offering. I'm glad to be here today, even if I didn't have a dime in my pocket. It's the reality of how we worship and serve that really is going to make us the church we ought to be, and how we put aside the past of the church and begin to think into the future. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have some juggernauts of struggle around that. We're going to have some juggernauts of what it may mean if a decision is made in this General Assembly that we're going to have to merge the spaces. We know that's on the table. None of this is going to be without some struggle. But the question is, can we all get back to the table again? And can we walk together, children, and not become weary? I think those are the challenges of this present day. And if we can model that here, think of the impact we can model throughout the world in Christendom.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
I know we went over time that I had promised we would not. But
when you said that, I
felt
thought, okay,
like
we'll see.
I mean, you know, when you have the opportunity to, you know, get some really good, I mean, I felt like I was just in church. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Diane.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Thank you.
I mean,
Yeah.
It was a pleasure to be part of that conversation with you, Diane, and the stated clerk. And I want to take this opportunity to let our audience know because it was such a rich conversation, we've made available what we're calling an extra conversation. As you saw, and you know, Diane, we went a long time. We had an hour-long conversation, and we're making an extra available to folks to watch, and that will be available on pcusa.org/Matthew 25. And we're also uploading that to our PCUSA Facebook page. And in this extra conversation, it's the part of the conversation that reflects from you and the stated clerk the confirmation hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and how it relates to Matthew 25. Believe me, folks, you do not want to miss this insightful extra conversation. So check it out on pcusa.org/Matthew 25 or our PCUSA Facebook page. And I want to thank you both for sharing your time with us then and today. Thank you so much, Diane.
Oh, you are so welcome. It was a great conversation, especially as the General Assembly is only a month away. June 18th is coming fast. And speaking of the General Assembly, I do ask, especially in light of all that has happened with Buffalo and our Presbyterian Church, Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles, and the neighboring churches and presbyteries, Los Ranchos and others, that we really do pray for our commissioners as they discern the work of the church. It is an arduous task and a very important role to play in the future of the church. And so just please keep them in your prayers and keep our church and certainly our world in your prayers. So much is happening. I want to share with you today a beautiful hymn, something to think about that was inspired by the Matthew 25 vision titled, Jesus Be With Us. And don't we need Jesus to be with us? The text and the tune were written by David Gambrell from Theology, Formation, and Evangelism, which is an area in the Presbyterian Mission Agency. Philip Morgan from Central Presbyterian Church right here in Louisville, Kentucky, did the musical arrangement. This hymn celebrates God's work through the Matthew 25 invitation, building congregational vitality, dismantling structural racism, and eradicating systemic poverty. The refrain is based on Matthew 1:23, and they shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And Jesus' closing words in Matthew 28:20, I am with you always to the end of the age. This hymn is available to everyone in various formats for your worship needs on the Matthew 25 website, including the video version we're about to watch. So stay tuned. Let's listen.
With us, help us each day to follow the gospel we pray. Send us your Spirit and show us your way. Jesus, be with us today. Where there is hunger and thirst in the land, scatter the systems of greed. Jesus, be with us, make use of our hands, lift up your people in need. Jesus, be with us, help us each day to follow the gospel and live as we pray. Send us your Spirit and show us your way. Jesus, be with us today. Where there is hatred because of our skin, break down the wall of our fear. Jesus, be with us to save us from sin. In your great love, draw us near. Jesus, be with us, help us each day to follow the gospel and live as we pray. Send us your Spirit and show us your way. Jesus, be with us today. Where there are valleys of bones dry as dust, build up the body of Christ. Jesus, be with us and help us to trust. Teach us a new way of life. Jesus, be with us, help us each day to follow the gospel and live as we pray. Send us your Spirit and show us your way. Jesus, be with us today. Send us your Spirit and show us your way. Jesus, be with us today.
Wow. Folks, the Matthew 25 vision is our guidepost. Action is our charge. Together, we're evolving to keep our feet to faith and our focus on actively engaging our world. So I hope you are excited about being a Matthew 25 church as I am. Together, we are laying the groundwork. We are making disciples who understand the call of the church to dismantle structural racism and eradicate systemic poverty and build a world that reflects the love and justice of Jesus Christ, so that those who have been held back and marginalized in our communities for far too long may actually be free to thrive and flourish. If you are still discerning the invitation to being a Matthew 25 church, please visit the website listed to help you in the process. We warmly welcome you to join us.
Thanks, Diane. I'm still sort of resonating over that conversation and the hymn, just so many things really hit home for me, especially today. I actually wrote down when the stated clerk said, "We as a church have to learn to love again." And I'm just completely struck by that thought, as you said in the opening of this episode, with the tragedies that we've experienced in this world over the last weekend. Yes, may we as a church learn to love again. And I hope that everyone will join us on Thursday, June 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern for another special episode of Being Matthew 25, where we are joined by the Reverend Gregory Bentley and Ruling Elder Alona Street Stewart, the co-moderators of the 224th General Assembly. They reflect on their time as co-moderators in this unique and virtual world of the last 2 years. Let's take a look at a snippet of that conversation.
It's going to be great.
The reality is for the church to continue to see its future purpose is to understand that sense of belonging. Mm-hmm. And so many of our wiser ancestors have addressed that issue, that all the gifts that you have been given are not for you. You have been given them to use for others. And I think that, our understanding in the church, and as we get ready for this General Assembly, the General Assembly is the gathering of people who belong together in this particular communion called the Presbyterian Church. It shouldn't be seen as the place where there's another separate non-personal entity called the church, and we're going up and knocking on the door asking that entity to do stuff for us or to hear us. What we need to say is, when we arrive at General Assembly, it is us. There is no other. The people who are working with General Assembly, the people who are preparing now for General Assembly, the people who will be reading and studying and praying together, that's all of us. The church is us.
Dr. Emily Towns, Dean of the School of Divinity at Vanderbilt, says it best for me. She says the church is not dying, it's being transformed.
It's being transformed, right?
And now transformation, the process of transformation can feel like death sometimes. And it may even look like death sometimes in terms of dwindling numbers and what have you. But I prefer to look at it as pruning and winnowing. That it's kind of counterintuitive. You prune a plant, you actually inflict injury on it in order to make it healthier. It really is counterintuitive. It's kind of like surgery, that you have to actually to create a wound in order to bring about health. Right. And I think that's what's happening now. And it is not necessarily pleasant, but I think it's necessary if we're going to live into the fullness of where God is leading us.
And when people start talking about tribalism as if, to be part of a system that's, tribal, means that you're competing with each other, you can't get along, or you are wanting to separate from each other, and like reduce them so that you can grow bigger. Well, from a person who comes from a tribe, that is like the antithesis of what the tribalism means. Tribalism for us is this family connection. So you start with your family, and then it's your extended family, where you actually call people by those terms of mother and father, cousin, auntie, uncle. And then it's, your people, your tribe. So, I want to say you have got it so wrong when you begin, using this term tribalism as something we need to forget about. No, actually come to some people who live in their tribes. We have something to show you and tell you. And I would say that about the church. If the church in the future can begin to really appreciate that it's we, it's not a possessive thing that I somehow have, that you haven't figured out. No, it's the church. We are a part of something bigger than us. The church has been a gift to us from God, and so we're a part of that.
I hope that you will join us Thursday, June 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern for that entire conversation. Again, it was a wonderful, rich conversation. Friends, thank you. Thank you for responding to the good news of Jesus and being a faithful expression of what it means to be Christ's disciples in this time and place, and for being Matthew 25.